Alright, today we're going to be tearing down a 1983 Kawasaki KX250 two-stroke. Now the first thing we're going to do, eventually we're going to tear this completely down and pull the head, cylinders, clutches, split the case, pull transmission apart. The first thing we're going to do is take 12mm head bolts off. There's 6 of them, and they're 12mm. You want to make sure that these get torqued back down when you're going back together. This one here was a bit of a challenge to get this apart. You can use anything. I don't like to use anything metal pulling these apart, but once you get it broke free, you can kind of tap here with the hammer, kind of break that seal, and then once you get that pulled free, I like to use, in this case, a plastic putty knife so you're not damaging any surfaces. A lot of times once you get that gasket broke free, a lot of times you can use anything plastic to kind of pry it apart here. In this case, there was some sealant here, kind of sealing things up, not allowing it to come off easy. Now this one here, we can spin that crank and see that piston going up and down. So you know that cylinder isn't locked up, or that piston isn't locked up. You've got your gasket here, and this is called your head gasket. Below your cylinder is called your base gasket. So the next thing we're going to do is pull the reef valve assembly, and that's a 6mm, or excuse me, an 8mm all the way around here. And this is where your carburetor sits. We'll get those off there. That'll slide out. This is your boot here. This is a rubber boot that a lot of times will dry and crack. You want to make sure you inspect that really good. This one's cracked, so it's going to be junk. This is your reed valve assembly here. These pedals open and close, allowing air, fuel in. And inspect those, make sure that those are all closed. They can break in here. You want to replace those pedals if they are, and these are called the pedals down here. One on each side. So pull these 4 Phillips screws on each side to remove those pedals. So the next thing we're going to do is pull this cylinder, and it takes a 14mm bolt, and these again are going to be torqued down. If you don't do the torquing on these, it can cause problems with gaskets leaking. And we've just got 4 of these. And that'll allow that to be pulled off. Now, we're going to have to pull this radiator hose here. Just grab a pair of pliers, and may not completely take this off now, but for sure want to loosen it up. And I like to loosen both sides. You never really know which side is going to come off the easiest. So I just loosen both these clamps, kind of pry them up to the middle there. Now, this cylinder, or the cylinder's ready to come off. So you can kind of wiggle it. Sometimes you got to tap on it with a hammer to kind of break that seal free again, kind of like you did the cylinder head. And I take and twist these hoses just a little bit to kind of break that seal as well. And then you can pry up some more, and there is your cylinder there. The cylinder, you've got your CCs right here, exhaust port here, intake here, and there's the bottom of your cylinder. So you've got your piston now, and we'll go ahead and pull that piston. We've got what they call a circlip on either side of the piston. You know, inspect that piston for any kind of grooves, any kind of markings. You can kind of see there it's slightly marked up. It's not necessarily grooved to touch, but now we're going to pull this circlip, and I get a small screwdriver or a pick in there, kind of just pry that out. And then you can take and tap the piston pin through there. Sometimes if the motor's locked up, that's way more of a challenge to get this pin out. And you can use anything to kind of tap on it. And once you get it a little more than halfway out, it'll get past that rod, and you can just kind of lift it off here. Here's your bearing here for your top connecting rod, and there's your piston. bearing circlet. So now we're gonna pull this shift mechanism off. Now this flywheel is already pulled, unfortunately, so I'm not gonna be able to show you that, but I'm gonna show you the tool that you use to pull it. And it is this is a Motion Pro, part number 080026. What it is a 27 millimeter threaded bolt here, and we've got a pin that goes in, pushes against the crank, pulls the flywheel off. So it's 27 by 1.0 millimeter threads, left hand external threads, which means this here. So screw that into the, and left hand is reverse threads, so screw that into the flywheel, grab a 17 millimeter socket, run this down, again hitting that crank shaft there, pulling the flywheel off. So right now we just have the stator that we've got to pull off here. Looks like two 8 millimeter bolts. We'll remove this plate and that will all come out together. There's your stator and your stator plate there. That's all set. We've got your shifter here. That's a 10 millimeter. And these shifters here, a common problem for them is to splines on the shaft here to strip out. And this one wasn't extremely tight, so we probably won't take and resell it. We don't want to sell anything that's junk. But now it's a bit of a challenge to get off here. And that is your shift mechanism there, kind of a different style. Then we'll go ahead and flip this over. We'll pull the clutches on the other side. You've got your oil fill plug here, and that's a rubber fill plug. That's where you put your oil in. Now we've got 8 millimeter bolts holding this clutch cover on. And here's your water pump here. And we won't have to pull that water pump cover to remove this clutch cover, but we're going to pull it at some point, so we'll just remove these bolts now. Go ahead and pull that. There's your impeller there, held on with a 10 millimeter. And this impeller, you actually just spin it. And I like to do this quick and hang on to your crank here. And then you can just go in there and lift that impeller off. This is an aluminum impeller, so just be careful you don't damage any areas. We can just leave this on here for now until we get it off, get it in a better spot. And we will now pull this clutch cover. Kind of tap on it there to break that seal, then we're able just to lift that off. We've got your Kickstarter gear here, so just be careful. That is spring loaded, but it shouldn't spin right there. And we've got your transmission oil there. This is a heavyweight oil used in these two strokes. So we'll go ahead and pull this clutch here. 10 millimeter, 5 bolts holding that clutch on there, or holding the pack, and I'll show you how to do that there. So pull these. 2-stroke, you're always using your clutch to get into the power. So you want to make sure that these get replaced ever so often. And your manual will tell you how often. So go ahead and pull this cover here. I'm going to flip this up so you can see a little bit better. So I just take this top plate here, kind of pry that off, pull this, and there's a large nut down in here. Now this large nut has a bolt, larger bolt here, and a keeper. And I'll grab a socket to remove that bolt, and I'll show you how to remove that keeper there. That keeper, what we're going to do is grab a flat screwdriver, and we're going to tap on that to flatten that keeper, allowing that nut to spin. Now if you don't flatten this keeper here, you'll cause problems getting that off. Grab a socket to remove that nut. An 1.1/16 socket. And I kind of hold that basket while I spin this. Just spin that off. And I like to pull that keeper just to get it out of the way. A lot of times we replace that keeper. If you've done this more than once or twice, that keeper gets really chewed up. Now the next thing I do then, to keep everything together, go ahead and put this clutch basket back together, or this clutch plate back together, and put the bolts back down in here. And I put a little bit of pressure on these bolts. So you don't have to tighten them all the way. And these again need to be torqued when you're going back together. Those are aluminum posts that those bolts are going down into, so just be careful not to hammer them too hard. So then now you're able to just pull that clutch basket off completely together. You're also able to pull that pack and replace just the basket, pull it apart, clean it up, and there is your clutch pack assembly. So if you don't put pressure on those bolts, those discs will just kind of slide around and go all over. So that's why I do that. Now the next thing is the Kickstarter gear. What I do, and this is, you got to be very, very careful doing this, but grab a good pair of pliers and put a lot of pressure on there to make sure you don't damage those threads. You don't want that to slip. And then you got to spin this back about a quarter turn, maybe not quite that much, to undo it. What happens is this peg right here sits underneath this arm right there, and you're not able to pull that out. So you got to pull it past there, counterclockwise, about a quarter turn. Wouldn't have to go that quite quarter turn to get that arm past there. And there's your Kickstarter gear there. There's your ratchet. A lot of times these will fail. That's a pretty common problem as well. So I like to remove that arm as well. Inspect that. It's 2 10mm bolts. Grab snap ring pliers here. There's a couple gears that will require snap ring pliers. And we just lift those off once we get those snap rings out of there. This gear sits right on the crank. It's kind of a 2-gear set there. Sits right on the crank. This spacer here goes with the clutch basket. And then you've got your shift mechanism, or your shifter arm here. That'll just, should just pull right out. I have to kind of tap on it from the other side. We've got your shift star here. Looks like a 12mm. And I'm really careful with these that you don't just slam on these. A lot of times these will break right here. If you do, just take it, use a bigger impact and slam on it. So I kind of ease into that so you don't break that star off of there. So pull that bolt, Again, this is all spring loaded, so be really careful pulling that apart. Got an 8mm down in there. And we will flip this motor over now and see what it's going to take to split this case. So I need to see what's holding this shift. Sometimes they put a circlip on the other side of the shift shaft, and I just don't want to damage that pulling it out. So you can use a rubber mallet, just tap on this, and that just comes right out of there. So we've got your shift release here as well with your shift rod, or your clutch release rod. That slides right down into this main transmission shaft. So shift rod is out of there, and now we can just slide that star. Should just be able to slide that star off of there. We might leave it connected to that shift drum if it's going to be a problem. But it should just kind of pop right off of there. There we go. There's your shift mechanism there, your shift star, and there's a little detent there. Alright, we'll go ahead and flip it over then and split that crankcase. We got a lot of 8mm bolts we need to pull all the way around this crankcase.